Hey, what's going on, guys? Rum Gaming here, back to the video. Today's episode, I want to do just a quick high-level overview, just how each healer feels to play in a high-ish Mythic Plus setting. I've peaked personally at around 2800 IO, and I've not played each healer necessarily that high, but I've played pretty much each healer around Keystone Hero, either just shy or just above it. So I just wanted to give sort of an overview of each healer kind of at around that level of gameplay. So not super high Mythic Plus, but also not super low Mythic Plus, just sort of, I'd call it like medium high Mythic Plus level, how each spec feels, how they play, my opinions on them, and maybe I can help guide you into picking a healer for War Within. So this is not going to be necessarily a deep dive into each individual spec, just more of an overview, my opinions on them, and how they play. So Restoration Shaman is the first healer spec I've ever picked up. I've played it all the way since Burning Crusade, and I still play it today. If there was one healer that I could kind of put in the middle of the spectrum, that's just kind of the jack of all trades, can do pretty much everything you ask it to do, it's gonna be Restoration Shaman. Not too hard, not too easy. It does suffer, unfortunately, from some button bloat, but I would not consider this one of the harder healers to play. It does have a good mix of heal over time effects through things that are hot on the target. It also has a good form of burst healing due to our mastery deep healing, right? Where you heal more and more of a target's health pool, the less health that they have. So I would consider playing Restoration Shaman if you like kind of sitting back, casting a little bit more. You don't necessarily want to be in the action. You like to play around like a toolkit. So for example, totems, that's a huge part of playing Restoration Shaman. It's kind of a mix between a healer and sort of a support style. And just really, if you're just looking for a healer that is just really good at pretty much everything, it's simple, it's very straightforward, you don't want to have to think about too much. In my opinion, Restoration Shaman is probably going to be your go-to. Okay, up next, let's talk about Discipline Priest. So the first thing you'll probably notice is there's a whole lot less buttons on my character. There's a lot less button bloat going on with the Discipline Priest. Now, while that is true, I do not think that Discipline Priest is easier to play than Restoration Shaman. It's not quite as straightforward. Sure, there are less buttons, but there's a lot more going on in your general rotation. So Discipline Priest is going to have something called Atonement, and we actually heal through doing damage. So to just show you what that looks like really quick, let me put up my Power Word Radiance. This will apply Atonement, and we can kind of read it out. So Atonement, healed whenever you damage an enemy, and it'll do it for X amount. And I say X amount, I believe it's actually 70%. So 70% of the damage that you do is then redirected onto your allies as healing. So this is something that you have to keep track of at all times. And historically speaking, Atonement isn't something that you can just always keep up. You could typically keep it up like 70, 80, 85% of the time, somewhere in there, but not 100% of the time, which means that you do have areas that if you're not using it in an efficient manner, you can time it up really poorly with like a big boss AoE phase, and you can wipe your group because your Atonement was down. So the hardest part about Discipline Priest is trusting your damage. Again, you heal through doing damage. You don't do a whole bunch of direct healing. If your damage stops, your healing stops, which is kind of what makes Disc Priest so hard to play. So one of the big ways that you can kind of offset that is through mitigation. So you do have some spells like Pain Suppression. You can utilize that at good times, heavy damage phases, to reduce a lot of the healing that you have to do. You also play around something called Mindbender, which is like a pet that goes out. And when that pet goes out, you kind of go into this elevated state where you do a whole lot more damage. So again, more damage means more healing. So you have to kind of play around this pet and this cooldown to try to get the most throughput from your kit. Now, I don't mean to scare you away from Discipline Priest. I think Discipline Priest is probably the most engaging healer spec in the game, and once you get it, it is the most fun I've probably ever had, outside of maybe something like Holy Paladin and maybe Mistweaver. It's one of the most engaging healer specs that you can play, but it will challenge you. So if you like to be pushed to your limits, if you like a really engaging spec, you like to damage kind of more than you like to heal, then I think the Discipline Priest would be a pretty good choice for you going into War Within. It's getting a really nice hero talent revamp. the void form or whatever it's called, the shadow portion. Looks really cool, looks really fun to play. And I will be playing a bunch of Disc Priest in War Within. Okay, now let's go into Holy Priest. So if Restoration Shaman is the jack of all trades healer, and this priest is going to be one that like really pushes you, very engaging, a lot going on, a lot to manage, I would say Holy Priest is the complete opposite of Disc Priest. It's going to be a very, very straightforward healer, mainly just got a few spells going on, and it's going to be probably the easiest to pick up if you're a brand new healer. And I can't remember now if I said Restoration Shaman was the easiest to pick up. It's probably, in my opinion, the second easiest behind Holy Priest. So if I did say that earlier, I do apologize. So the way Holy Priest will work is you have these holy words that kind of go out, and they do a whole bunch of single target healing or AoE healing. So your holy words Sanctify, if you're more in a raid environment, you'll be focused more on this spell. And if you're more in a Mythic Plus environment or PvP or something like that, you're probably more focused on Holy Word Serenity. So the whole idea of Holy Priest is to play around your holy words and try to get them off cooldown as much as you possibly can, because they are so unbelievably strong. So for a Mythic Plus setting, you can see here under the tooltip of Holy Word Serenity, cooldown is going to be reduced by 6 seconds when you cast Heal or Flash Heal. Now also, Prayer of Mending will also reduce the cooldown of Holy Word Serenity through this talent here, Voice of Harmony. So Prayer of Mending reduces the cooldown of Holy Word Serenity by 4 seconds. So really the main thing that you are focused on as a Holy Priest is using Holy Word Serenity, getting your Prayer of Mending out, spamming Flash Heal. That is the vast majority of your healing right there. So Holy Priest would be something that I would recommend. Again, if you're new to healing, you're looking for a very straightforward approach, you just want 2, 3, 4 buttons to press. There is more buttons to press than just that. There is more with the spec, but that's probably 80% of what you're going to be doing right there is within these 3 buttons in a Mythic Plus environment. So if you never picked up Holy Priest before, that's kind of what you're looking at getting into. Both specializations, of course, bring that insane power infusion. We also bring the Fort Stamina buff. So lots of good group play potential there. Let's go ahead and move into the next healer. All right, let's move into Holy Paladin now. So Holy Paladin is also going to be a very engaging spec, very similar to something like a Discipline Priest, but more in melee form, and you don't have to keep up with any sort of atonement. So most of your healing is going to be coming through this Holy Power spending system, and what you'll do is you will attack with your abilities like Judgment, Crusader Strike to build Holy Power, then you'll spend it with your Word of Glory. Now, very similar to a Holy Priest, there's not too many buttons to press. There are more than a Holy Priest, because I have like 3 abilities tied into my queue here. So you probably have 6, 7 buttons that you will regularly kind of rotate through. And very similar to a priest, you have something called these blessings, and you put blessings on typically your highest DPS target. Now, one of the reasons that I say Holy Paladin is very similar to something like a Discipline Priest is because it's very engaging, and you have to be on top of your damage to heal, right? So you gain Holy Power by doing damage, and if you're not doing damage, you're not getting Holy Power to heal with. Now, Holy Paladin has had a lot of button bloat in the past. A lot of that has been removed in War Within Prepatch. It's not perfect, and I think we're going to get a little bit more with the hero talents. So earlier I said 6 to 7 buttons. It's probably going to be more than that, especially once you factor in like all the little mini cooldowns that we have. Now, one thing that I do like about Holy Paladin is you feel very powerful outside of cooldowns, and I think that Holy Paladin probably has the best single target burst healing out of all the healers. It's very quick, it's very reactive, and it hits really hard. Now, that wasn't necessarily the case in Dragonflight when our Holy Power spenders were kind of weak, but they've been buffed, and Holy Paladin's feeling like a very big bursty spec right now. So if you're looking for a very fun, engaging spec that's kind of in the fight a lot, you like to be able to top people off in just 1 or 2 globals. It's very flashy. There's a lot going on. Again, very engaging. Then I would probably recommend to play Holy Paladin. I would probably classify Holy Paladin as the bursty single target healer, pretty much the opposite of Holy Priest, but just in melee form. Now, between Holy Priest and Holy Paladin, I would give the edge to Holy Paladin in Mythic Plus content, especially in terms of their cooldowns. they really have a great toolkit for being able to handle a bunch of crazy healing situations, where Holy Priest doesn't seem to have quite as good of a toolkit. And we also do have a battle res. Okay, now let's quickly talk about Mistweaver Monk. And I'm going to specifically talk about Fistweaver, not necessarily the, I think they call it Castweaver. I've not played it a whole bunch. I played a little bit in PvP, but I'm going to talk about Fistweaver for the most part in a Mythic Plus setting. So one thing that historically does hurt Fistweaver is we don't have a ton of utility. The one thing that we do bring, though, is called Mystic Touch here, which will increase the physical damage that our targets take by 5%. So we're really good to run in like a physical damage comp. So if that's what you guys run, you run like a physical damage comp. Fistweaver is really good with those type of comp. Now our damage is going to be very, very tied to our healing, even more so than something like a Holy Paladin. Probably on par with something like a Disc Priest. If you're not doing damage, you're not going to be able to heal. And the reason for that, because the way that we work is we have something called Ancient Teachings that goes out and it'll heal for 170% of the damage done through our Tiger Palm, Blackout Kick, and Rising Sun Kick. Now in AoE scenarios, we actually come over to Awaken Jade Fire, and that's where our healing comes in through our Spinning Crane Kit. So you have to manage two things. You have to manage being within your Jade Fire Stomp, and then your Ancient Teaching buff up here in the top right. You have to manage that, and you have to make sure it's always up. Now, this was a change in the War Within to where this is now a 15-second cooldown along with your Jade Fire Stomp, which is also a 15-second cooldown. So they reduced Jade Fire Stomp by 5 seconds, which means you will almost always have it up. As long as you're casting Jade Fire Stomp, Ancient Teachings will be up, because you're going to get a whole bunch of resets on this, and it'll feel fine. So I'd probably consider Mistweaver Monk to be one of the more passive melee healers. And the reason I say this is because we literally heal through our damage versus something like a Holy Paladin. They do heal through their damage, but then they have to spend it in the form of Holy Power. Versus a Fistweaver, you don't really have to. It's very passive. It just kind of, the healing goes out. You don't have to spend it on anything. You do damage and you heal. Other thing that's really nice about this, which kind of differs from a Discipline Priest, is the Atonement on Discipline Priest isn't always up. But your Ancient Teachings on a Fistweaver will almost always be up. You're never going to have any sort of issue with it being down. Now, the downside of this is you will run into bosses to where you can't heal unless you're doing damage to the boss. So like this phase, for example, final boss of Uldaman, you got all the little orbs going out. It's got a knockback. It's just very hard to find a path to get to the boss. And that's really going to affect your healing, because if you're not doing damage, you can heal, but not very good. You're going to be at like 50% throughput. So if you are on the target and you're doing damage, your healing is insane. If you are off, your healing is very bad. So I would probably consider this to be the sort of more passive, relaxed melee healer, and it's not going to be quite as high APM. Okay, now let's move on to Restoration Druid. So Restoration Druid, probably when it's strong, has the highest healing output out of any healer. And the reason I say that is because we have something called Mastery of Harmony. It's our mastery. And our healing is increased for each of the heal over time effects that we have on the target. So this makes our healing scale very hard. If you can prep and kind of prepare for any sort of damage that's going to come out, you can get all your hots up and you can just absolutely blow through some of these high damage phases. Now, that is easier said than done, because you have to know a lot of the fights in and out, and you have to be a bit more proactive with the spec to get the healing throughput that you want. Another thing that makes Restoration Druid very difficult is the mana efficiency. You're throwing out all these hots. There's no limit. You can just kind of throw out whatever you want, and your mana will tick down very hard, very quickly if you're throwing out too many hots. Another thing that's very difficult about Restoration Druid, and I think a lot of our healing has been pulled away from this, but back in Season 1 of Dragonflight, a ton of our healing was tied through verdancy. And basically, that means people have to stand in your efflorescence to get healed. And the problem with that is allowing unpug allies to stand within your green circle. So pretty easy in a coordinated group, just tell people to. In a pug group, people typically don't listen, right? Another thing that's a little bit difficult about Restoration Druid is we have something called Cap Form. and we have to go into this cat form to do a lot of our damage. And it's not really too bad, but it is more dots that you have to keep track of. So it's not going into the cat form and doing the damage that's difficult. It's keeping track of the dots that you put out from a damage standpoint, and then also keeping track of the hots that you put out on your allies. So there is a million things with Restoration Druid that you have to track from a heal over time standpoint on your allies, as well as a damage over time aspect on the enemies. And this is one of the specs that feel really easy until it doesn't. Now, I don't want to scare you away from Restoration Druid. This is probably the most played healer historically in the history of WoW, but this is one of those specs with kind of a low skill floor and a high skill ceiling. From a throughput standpoint, probably has the highest healing output. However, it also probably has the most things going on at any given time from a damage and both from a healing standpoint. So very strong, a very powerful healer, but you will have to put more time into understanding what's going on under the hood than probably any other healer. Okay, and then finally for Evoker, like I said earlier, I've not played a whole bunch of Evoker in the past. I've just kind of dipped my toes into it, but I did still want to give my opinion on it because I do think that this is one of the lesser known healers in the game. I do think it's probably one of the more complex healers, but that might just be because it's new and I've never played a healer like this. So the way that Evoker works is going to be very similar to if you're familiar with like Beacon of Light on a Holy Paladin. You'll put a beacon out, and then any target that you heal will also heal the beacon. And the reason for that is due to the spell called Echo down here at the very bottom. You put an echo on a target, and then any healing you do will also echo to that target like a beacon. Now, this does cost 2 essence, and Evoker does work off an essence system, and you'll typically be spending your essence on mainly echoes. So the idea seems to be to spread out a bunch of echoes and then hit your targets with high single target healing, and then it kind of echoes or reverberates onto your other targets. So to me, Preservation Evoker almost feels like a combo healer. You have to press your buttons in a very specific way to a very specific order for your abilities to kind of buff one another. So for example, our strongest single target heal is going to be Verdant Embrace. It does a ton of single target healing, almost like a lay on hands. However, by itself, I mean, that sounds strong, but with 2 echoes on 2 allies, you can turn that single target heal into a 3 target heal. Or if you use Temporal Anomaly here, you can throw out an orb that will put echo on every target it hits. And this can turn into basically a group heal. A single target heal has now been turned into a 5-person heal. So you can kind of set yourself up if you're a very skilled player with these insane combos. It's very creative playstyle. So out of all the specs, I would say this is the most creative spec. This is the most big brain spec. If you can think really well and adaptively on the spot, I think you could be a really good Preservation Evoker, because you can take one spell and you can kind of change it into 3, 4, 5 different combos that are all going to be good in their own unique situation. Another thing that's really nice about Preservation Evoker is most of your damage is going to be tied into like your Fire Breath and Deep Breath. So a 2-minute cooldown, a 30-second cooldown, and then you also have Living Flame, which can be spammable. So the damage rotation is just kind of send it and forget it for the most part. And then the healing rotation is mainly playing around Echo to kind of make your own combos, your sort of your own play style of healing. And then the healing rotation is going to be how you manage your essence, and then playing around your Echo to kind of reverberate some of that healing out to other allies. So I will try to share more on this spec in the War Within. I'm really enjoying it right now. I do think that this is the most complex healer out of all of them though. Definitely not a noob-friendly spec. So if you're new to the game, I would probably skip over Evoker unless it just sounds interesting. If it sounds interesting, then go ahead and try it. But if you're just looking for a more of a straightforward approach, I'd probably skip over Preservation Evoker. All right, guys, that's going to be the end of this video. I hope I gave a decent overview of all the different healer specs. There's a lot going on between the 7 different healer specs. So hopefully I could kind of give you a glimpse into what each of those specs look like, kind of how they feel, kind of how they play, and help you make a decision on the healer that you want to play in War Within. If you guys enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. See you on the next one.